Day 1, we begin with the Bogo Indian defense. And it goes like this: d4, knight f6, c4, e6, and g3, bishop b4, bishop d2, and then c5. Let's see what they say about this move. A thematic idea taken directly from the traditional Bogo Indian. Black wants to delay the taking on d5 and prepares to capture on d4 with the c pawn. Aha, it says here that the difference is that if you take on d2 as black like this, and queen takes and then play c5, then white has an option of d5, and that's worse for black. So that's why first he plays c5 to make d5 less attractive. And here white can capture cb and then bishop g2. Okay, the point of this move is that white keeps an option of e4, because if you here move the knight to f3 immediately, then e4 becomes impossible to play. So by bishop g2 immediately, you keep this option of e4, and now depending on what black does, if he plays d5, then there's no possibility of d5, but of e4. So let's see. There are a couple of options. First one is d5 by black. Okay. It says here, this move is not the most common, as I have noticed that black players often prefer to avoid playing the pawn to d5. It seems that now black's pawn structure loses flexibility, and white enjoys a pleasant edge. And now white can continue like this. Knight c6, attacking the pawn, knight f3, castle, castle, bishop d7. Okay. And also here it gives some other line, like b6. Now rook c1, probably just wanting to capture on d5 next to hit on c6. And if bishop b7, then just e3 to protect the pawn. Queen d6, queen a4. And it says here, white has very easy play while black lacks serious counterplay. It's no wonder that black quickly lost the thread in the following encounter. And now rook fc8 was played by black. Rook c2. Rook c7. Now he just piles pieces on the c file, and after rook ac8, white took on d5. And now black made a huge mistake. He played ed5. And it says here that knight d5 was better, because after knight e1, white keeps the edge. And because of this double pawn on the queen side, it feels like white has an extra pawn, which is true. But this move ed5 here, instead of capturing with the knight, is very bad because it allows bishop h3 hitting the rook, and then after knight d7, knight e5 was played, and this was the game Ivan Chugulko from New York, 1988, and black couldn't avoid the material losses, because, for example, if you take on e5 like this, you can take it with the pawn. And now if rook c2 first, because if queen e5, then just bishop d7, and not like this, come on. Bishop d7, and you're a piece up. If rook c2, now you don't capture the queen, because then black takes the second rook and it's okay for black, but you just capture on c2 back, and then this knight on d7 becomes a target. If he takes and now ed6, now it's different, now it's a queen for a rook. So yeah, this whole situation seems pretty hopeless, because if you go back with the knight, then you exchange rooks and then take on d7. Maybe with the bishop, because if you go with the if you take with the knight, there might be some bishop c8. Some bishop c8. Ah, you have knight b8 anyways, and checkmate on e8, so it's okay. All right. Yeah, so it's clear that knight e5 is very good. Let's go back to this situation, bishop d7 instead of b6. And what does Avrukh recommend here? Just going e3. And again, black has 3 against 2 on the queen side, but with double pawns on the b file. Queen e7, queen e2. Also, this variation is very good also. Knight e5, and if bishop e8, if rook fc8, queen e2, bishop e8, rook ac1, with better play for white. Yeah, because of the better structure and more space he got. Okay, so after e3, queen e7, queen e2, rook fd8 was played, and now e4. Now breaks the center, takes, bishop e8, and now rook ad1, just defend the pawn, rook ac8, rook fe1, and it finishes here. It just says that white has a clear positional advantage, which is true, but there might be some issues with the d4 pawn if black somehow manages to double by rook d7 and rook cd8. Is there maybe some other option, like maybe not go for the e4 break, maybe to try to press on the c file, like here, to go rook ac1 and then to somehow put pressure on the c file, capture on d5 and then put the knight to c5 and so on and so on. I think like that this is a better way to go. Let me just check the engine. So after this, e4 is the best move, really. Rook fe1 is the best move. Okay, but nothing wrong with rook ac1 as well. I feel like this is the better path to go. Rook ac1 and then just probe black, trying to get the knight to c5, via b3 and to go to c5 and then provoke b6, and once you provoke b6 it's gonna be easier to put pressure on the knight on c6. Okay, I'm gonna take a note here and I'm gonna revisit this later when I finish the whole chapter. So I'm just gonna make a note here that it's my idea. And let's go back to the move 6. So let's repeat this once more. We have d4, knight f6, c4, e6, g3, bishop b4, bishop d2, c5, takes, bishop g2, and now the move 6 is castle. A more flexible approach. And now white can play e4. The whole point of bishop g2 is to have e4 and then put the knight to e2 later on. So now black can play d6, trying to get e5 and to weaken the c5 square, which is the only setback of the e4 move, because the d4 pawn doesn't get enough support. Okay, and here d5 is also mentioned. d5 is mentioned, and if white captures, ed, e5, knight e8. Wait, if you go to e4, what happens? Can you somehow trap the knight with h4, knight e2? Or do you simply play this move, knight e2? What do you do? I think h4 is too much because black has a f6 and puts some pressure on f2 later on. I don't think it's enough. So what's actually played on knight e4? If you do knight e2, then maybe there is also f5 as a move. Let's see. So here it says knight e2. Knight c6 and now castle just. And what bugs me the most, what happens on f6? Knight d2. Oh. Knight d2 and if bishop f5, then you go knight b3. Well, that's interesting, but maybe I can take, give a check, king h8. I don't think this is that good. Maybe to capture the pawn in the end, like this d5, knight e5, and take on b4. Yeah, this might be the solution. But let's go back. Let's go back to this. They mentioned d5 and just knight e8 next. After which knight e2 was played, knight c6, castles, and now knight c7. And here it mentions that bishop g4 is not so good because of f3. So we go here, and now a3, a quite strange decision, I would say, because you just exchange this double pawn. And here they mention some alternative. Okay, a3 is justified by freeing the square for the b1 knight, but I don't know, the knight can go both to d2 and b3, so I don't know how it's useful. They mentioned this move, knight d2, and after bishop g4, knight b3, and on f6 to go f3, bishop f5, and then f4. And then on b6 to go rook c1, queen d7, and then to go back to a1 to reroute the knight to c2 and e3. This seems okay for white, but I would have to check it out with the engine later on. I'm not gonna do it immediately because it might cause some lag in the recording, so I'm not gonna do it. Okay, so here the main move is d6, actually. d6, we looked at d5, so d6, okay, let's see what they say on d6. 92, okay, developing normally. And now they mention knight c6 or e5. So this, let's go first with knight c6. Knight c6 is rarely played, it says here, and Avrukh recommends a3. After a3, if black captures immediately, then there's knight a3, queen a5, queen d2. It says it's slightly better for white. For example, if you'd capture on d2, takes... Yeah, you have knight b5 as well, you can push your pawn to f4 and get even more space. So yes, it's very clear that white is better here. But the other move that's recommended here for black is queen b6. Queen b6, and now white castled. And now e5. Time to play this move. to provoke somehow d5 maybe, and to get the knight from f6 to c5. And also they mention here a5 as an option. Now white captures, queen b4, and now knight a3. Heading for b5. Heading for b5, and then capturing on b2 is very risky, because after this also d6 becomes vulnerable. If rook d8, oh, there's a nice move, knight f4, with this idea to trap the queen. And if this happens to block this idea, then anyways white does this, takes, and black cannot stop rook fb1. That's nice. So let's go back. a5, takes, knight a3, and if black plays e5 instead of capturing on b2, there's knight b5, and it says here that white has better prospects. So if you take on c4, then there's at least knight d6. And if queen e6, oh no, that doesn't work. I mean, it can work, but you might have to deal with knight b5 or just capturing. Maybe this, followed by either d5 or knight c7, but you can go here, and this feels really bad for black. Okay, so after this, what happens if he captures like this? It doesn't say in the book, but let's try to figure it out. If he takes, maybe rook takes even, but also this one is quite natural, because again, after queen b2 there are ideas like knight b5, and queen becomes a huge target. You might have to play d5, but I could just play knight ec3 maybe, and then rook b1 next. Let's say in case of this move, to go c5. And if knight e4, then to capture and go rook a4. And on queen b2, how do you actually trap the queen? Wait, let's go back. So d5, this. Oh, maybe you can even go e5 and or here go knight. Oh yeah, c4 hangs, damn it. Oof, wait. It has to be simpler than this. I mean, the simplest way is to go knight c7 and take on d5 like this. But I feel like there is something more to this. But I'll come back to this later, once we finish the chapter. So we're on move 10. After this, knight c6, a3, queen b6, and now castles and e5 by black. And now white goes with d5 anyways. He allows this potential maneuver. So black goes to e7, and now queen d2. Queen d2. And it says here that a b4 is not as good because after queen b4, queen d2, you take on c4. Wait, but do you need to allow this? Can you play this? Maybe not, because of after knight d7, knight c5 comes and black is doing quite okay. So after this queen c4, rook c1, queen b3, knight a3, bishop g4. It led to unclear play. Yeah, I agree. Black is a pawn up and I don't see a clear compensation. So let's go to queen d2 here. Okay, now b4 is under attack and it says here b3 is weak because of queen b4. And the b3 pawn becomes occupied. For example, if I take, next knight d2 and grab the pawn. And also there's no knight d7, knight c5, which is also very important. Okay, so b3 is bad. And that leaves him with the only option, which is ba3. ba3, knight a3. And now black plays a5. But wait, what happens? Okay, black can play bishop g4, which is also mentioned in the book. Knight c1, rook fc8, knight d3, queen d4. Queen d4 to somehow pin the queen and also to attack d4. And now it mentions this, followed by b3 and knight c2. Okay, I can buy this. But wait, here, what happens if knight d7 is played? Maybe just b4 and then c5 with some pawn sacrifice. Maybe this, yeah, this looks quite nice. And if you make some random move like h6, I play c5, and if you capture knight c4, looks horrible. Now e5 hangs as well, d6 might come at some point. Yeah, this is quite good for white. So after this, a5 is the move to stop b4, actually, to somehow secure the c5 for the knight. That's my reasoning. It doesn't say here, but I believe that's the main point, to stop b4 without stopping knight c5. But now white has a very nice move here, c5, sacrificing the pawn. And now white is going to lose some time on the queen side. I mean, if DC, this just looks horrible. Knight c4 and black center is just going to disappear because queen c7 is impossible since there's d6. So on the next move you take on e5 and you're just fine. So queen c5 looks like the only logical move here. Rook fc1, okay, queen b4. If you go to b6, there's certainly some knight c4 and hitting d6 and a5, so it's not helping black at all. Let's say if you go back, I can take, and if you try to get to c5, I can at least play b4. And then look at these pieces. They're just so passive, so that doesn't bring too much hope. Queen b4 by black, but now white just trades. Takes knight c4. Hitting on d6, okay. Rook a1, rook a1, and now knight e8. Again, black is very passive. And here it mentions rook d8 variation. Rook d8, rook a5. So he's trying to get to b5 and to hit both pawns. Okay, knight e8, and then rook b5, f5 to break the pawns. That seems nice. But after this and capturing, now you don't capture back because there's probably some knight f6 and d5 becomes vulnerable. So there's a nice move here, knight c3. Knight c3 first. And it says here white has a clear edge. Well, is it clear or not? I'm not sure, but it does exist. What happens on knight f6? You attack d5, but maybe you can just go knight b6. Because still you can't capture like this. Maybe you can actually. Take. If takes on d5, take on d6. But I'm not sure about this move, bishop h3. Maybe it's nothing because you have always some luft with f3. Maybe it's nothing, and then you have knight g5 and let's say if rook a8 to somehow make counterplay. Knight g5 and if gives a check, king f2, bishop has to go back to d7 and then you capture the pawn and it's basically lost. Okay, so where was I? I was at queen b4. Oh yeah, this was the variation. Queen b4, takes, knight c4. Takes, knight e8. Knight e8. Wait, I was... so this is the main variation. But then after rook a7, black is a pawn up at the moment, but it doesn't help too much. f5 trying to break the pawns, but you can take knight f5, knight b6. and on this go back to a4 and capture the b4 pawn. And it says here that white has an advantage. Okay. Okay, let's go back. So let's go back from the beginning here. We have d4, knight f6, c4, e6, g3, bishop b4, bishop d2, c5, takes, and now bishop g2. Castles, e4, d6, knight e2, and now we looked at knight c6. But what about this move? What about e5? It says that it's black's main choice. And there are some nuances in this variation. It says here that a3 is the most accurate move, and that castles is not so precise, because after castling immediately there's bishop g4, and on f3 bishop e6, queen d3, queen b6, king h1, e d4, knight d4, knight b d7, b3, a5. It led to some double-edged play. And says black's activity compensates for his damage structure. Yeah, I can agree with that. Some knight c5 next with a4, and I think I don't have time for knight b5 here, because black seems to be too quick with knight c5, this, and a4. It seems very, very dubious. Maybe you can try with this, but no, there's rook fd8 probably, and then if e5 to save the knight, then to go back to e8. And now the point is, after knight e8, to take this knight. And if knight c7 to go, well, where to go? Maybe just to go rook d8 now. And the b3 pawn is very, very soft, and also there's some danger of doubling on the second rank. So yeah, I can buy this as a potential danger. So let's check out a3 first as a move. Knight a6 by black, or queen b6. Those are two main options. For example, if you take on a3, what happens? Knight a3, knight c6, castles. And now if bishop g4, f3, bishop h5, queen d2, queen b6, rook a d1. But why not the f knight, the f rook? I don't get it. It seems logical to have this rook. But they mentioned this one. Rook a1 and rook a8, king h1. Aha, maybe he wants to play f4 next. And that's why he kept the rook on f1. That makes sense. That makes lots of sense. Okay, ba3, knight a3, knight c6. Castles, queen b6. Queen b6 now instead of bishop g4. Queen b6, queen d2. So you give up this pawn. Okay. And yeah, it says here if knight d4 takes ed and rook fd1. Yeah, and you eventually capture this pawn, so d6 stays quite weak. So let's go back. Here a5 is suggested as a better choice, but now you allow this. So basically you don't allow b4, but you allow knight b5. You have to choose one. Choose the poison. Rook d8 and now b3. Also, they say that even this move is very good. But okay, let's rook d8, b3, knight b4, and now knight ec3. And white's better. Much better. Yeah, I guess he's going to play f4 at some point. Maybe not immediately when the king is on g1, but maybe when the king gets to h1, he'll push f4 and try to break through on the king side. Okay, so that was the ba3 sideline after a3. And let's check out knight a6 first. Now we have a forced line, a before, knight before, queen d2, and now a5. But what about queen b6 here? What about that? I don't know. What's that about? Rook a4, a5. No, rook a4 would just encourage bishop d7. So that's not the one. Maybe just knight c3. And then you have to play, or knight a3. And then you gotta play knight b5 anyways. You have to play a5 because next move is going to be knight b5, so I guess it kinda transposes to the main line. Yeah, as I can see later, it might transpose actually. So queen d2, a5 was played, castles, and now bishop e6. Black tries to create some counterplay by attacking white center. He would be happy to see d4, d5, weakening the dark squares. Yeah, that's very logical. d5 is no go. So that's why knight a3. Oh, let's go back. I forgot about this one. It says here, passive tactics would not work well for black, as was proven by the following encounter. So b6 was mentioned here. And again, white goes knight a3, bishop a6, rook a d1. So again, rook a d1, not rook f d1. Because white wants to play f4 at some point. That's quite nice to remember. Queen e7 and now f4, yeah. Rook ac1 or rook ac8 and now b3. Oh, this is nice. This is nice. White holds the pawn chain because the knight has to be on b4. And there's no a4 to break it through because of this. Okay, that's nice. That's nice. Rook c d8 and now knight c3. Oh, this seems like white has complete control. Also, I think I saw, I think it was in this opening actually, the game from candidates, Grishchuk against Giri. I think it's something like this. It was something like this, some structure with doubled b pawns and this e5 idea by black. And Grishchuk outplayed Giri completely. And also this game is from the game Grishchuk Yemelin 2004. A long time ago. Okay, so we have knight 8 castles, bishop e6, knight a3. And now queen b6. And now he mentions here that knight c3 is not so good. Because after e d4, knight cb5, d3, knight d6, wait, what? Knight d6. No, it's not possible. Come on. cb5, d6, knight. Ah, it's with queen d4. I mixed up variations. Wait. So after this, if you play queen d4, then after all this, you take on d6 and white has a better endgame. But black can do better here, and he can do ed4, and now knight cb5 doesn't make much sense because you can push d3 immediately, and the knight on a3 becomes a prisoner. So if you go here, queen c6 is possible, and also hitting the c4 pawn. And he says here that he doesn't see the way to fight for the advantage for white. But what's good about this position, after queen b6, is that white has a nice move, c5, which we saw a couple of moves before. c5, and now to push d5. So now white is a pawn down, but he has this strong d pawn and a nice outpost on c4. And let's see. If black goes bishop g4, what happens? f3, bishop h5. Now g4, bishop g6, knight c4, queen c7, and then d6. And we get back the pawn on e5, and we get this powerful center later on. That's actually nice. That's very nice. So this one takes d5, and what's the other option? Rook f d8. Because anyways, if you move the bishop, let's say to d7, you still have knight c4 and capture the pawn, because after this there's also d6. So rook f d8 seems like a good way to go, but again you have this queen c7, and now d6 doesn't work because there's bishop c4 and you lose a piece, at least a piece. So after this, queen c7, knight c3 is good to also stop b5 from happening. And it says here that if f4 happened, captures b5, yeah, it allows some complications. b5 is not something you want to allow as white, so actually knight c3 is really nice. After this, knight c3, and now bishop d7, f4. White is much better, it says. And what happens now? It stopped here, but let's see, bishop d7, f4. I guess you want to capture with the pawn on f4 after he captures, and then on b5 to have knight e5 or knight e3 as well, followed by e5, d6, and so on and so on. I will have to check it with my friend. But let's go back. Let's go back a bit and let's repeat something. So we have this e6, g3, bishop b4, bishop d2, c5, this bishop g2, castles, e4, d6, knight e2, e5, and now a3 first. We checked out knight a6, but now we're gonna check queen b6. And now castles. And here Avrukh mentions also one nuance. Queen d2 would seem really nice as well. To have something similar like takes knight a3, and I feel like it could transpose at some moment, but black has an option of going for b3. And now I'm just wondering if queen b4 works now. I think not, because if you do this, knight c6 can be quite dangerous, hitting on d4 and also b4. So after b3, rook, yeah, the c4 pawn becomes vulnerable as well. If you try this, knight c6, rook d1, and now black can play this, go knight e5, and how do you defend the c4 pawn? If you go here, then there's bishop g4, this, go back and follow it up with rook ac8, hitting on c4. And white can try something like this, but you can capture bishop d7, and after castling rook ac8, it says here it's double-edged. But I would still prefer being white here. But also, I guess black has some spatial advantage on the queen side because he put his pawn to all the way to b3. Yeah, also there is some rook c4 and trying to put pieces on the c file. So maybe it's not that good. Okay, so we can play castle immediately. And now again, if you take on a3 and take on b2, there's this, and black is in trouble. Black's queen is in trouble. So that doesn't work. If bishop g4 to somehow destabilize d4, we can take. And what happens if queen takes? Maybe f3 and then knight a3 next. Like something like bishop d7, knight a3. And still it feels like this is too dangerous to play. f3. Yeah, so let's go back ab4. So we were here, bishop g4, ab, and now if bishop e2 takes and ed4, there's c5. But can't you just capture like this? Ah, maybe there's this and then e5. Or something else, maybe. Something else. But I don't know what else. Wait, c5, queen b4. If I take queen d6, e5, queen e7. Ah, maybe just go here and then take on b7 next. Because if you do this, then queen b7 just works quite nicely. Then the rook on a8 is doomed. Okay, so we were here. Bishop g4, ab. Knights, bishop e2, queen e2, ed4, and now c5 takes, queen c5, e5. We have the same situation. The bishop is very unpleasant, and after this, it says that the bishop on g2 makes the difference, compensates for the missing pawn. But I think that white should get the pawn back pretty soon. So let's go back. A before, knight c6. Now, instead of bishop e2. f3, bishop e6. Wait, can you play this move? Can you play it? Capture and then d5 as well. But then black gets too many pawns. Way too many pawns. Or you can take with the bishop maybe, like this, and at least threaten 93. Maybe that's the issue. Ah, no, wait. Wait a second. Can you take, actually, and then after d5 to... maybe you can go rook d8, but... Then if queen c1, let's say, then you take on b4 first, king h1, and then you take. And what's the count? 7 pawns against 4. So it's compensating quite well. And also the knight cannot jump to c3, which is very important. Maybe this is the reason why it doesn't work. So let's go back. Bishop e6. Knight a3. And then e d4, king h1, queen b4, knight d4. And it says here white is slightly better, has a positional advantage, so on and so on. Which seems reasonable. If you take on b2 here, what happens? What happens? Maybe you can take on c6 and just do that, or take on e6 and then take on d6. Having this weakness as well, it seems quite unpleasant, because after queen e5, let's say, you might have even this move. You might even have that, and then put some pressure on these 2 pawns by rook fb1 and putting pressure on this, on the queen side. So yeah, this looks quite good. Let's see, where was I? A before, queen before. Knight. Oh, so no. It's not. It's the wrong. The wrong variation. Queen b6, castles. And now the main move is rook e8. Rook e8, a b4, queen b4, knight a3, and again the pawn on b2 is poisoned, so black goes bishop g4, f3, bishop d7 back, b3, a5, queen d3, and now knight a6. Now the plan is to get the knight to c5 once white captures on d4, or once black captures on d4, or white pushes d5 or takes on e5. So both sides get their plans realized after this. And now I think it's too late to do something else besides capturing, because white might have c5 next, and it might be very dangerous. So black took on d4. Now knight c2, queen b6, queen d4, knight c5. Wait, if this, then you just go rook a3, right? Rook a3 and trap the queen. So after this, knight c5, rook cb1, rook a6, knight c3. White has an edge in Avrukh Kosashvili 2004, but this is excellent for white. He has Marozzi bind, but also the d6 pawn is quite weak. Okay, black has a knight on c5, but I would not take it too seriously. Let's say now if you take on b3 as black, what happens? You can probably take and go with... Can you go with knight d4? Or maybe the simplest way to go is to go rook a3 to attack the knight, and if a4 to go knight a4 then. But then he might bail out with rook a6. This rook a4, but still you can capture the pawn on b7 and you're a pawn up, although he takes on c4 as well. Wait. It has to be something better here. Okay, rook a5 is the second choice. Wait, rook a3, a4. Takes rook a6. No, it has to be simpler than this. It has to be. Like maybe some c5 move, or if dc5 then queen c4 to target this knight, but still you have a4. And then you take, but there is this queen b5, I guess. And if you take, how do you continue? It's not so easy. Knight b3. Takes, and maybe now c5. No. Knight d4 leads to at least a4, if not even this move. Because after this and a4, the knight can jump to b3 back. But actually, can it jump? Maybe this is the reason why it doesn't work. Because now if rook c8, I go bishop f1, defend against rook c4 and then go rook b1 next. Try to force knight b3, which loses the a pawn. So this feels like a good pawn up. This might be the solution to this problem. Okay, let's now check really quickly. So we have this, rook a6, knight c3. And this is where the book stops. This is the end of chapter 1. No, you know what? I'm gonna change the plan. I'm going to check all of these lines once I finish the book. I'm gonna take all this for granted, and after this I'm going to check all these lines with the engine to follow the database to see what's the trendy line in this in particular variation. So I'm gonna do that. And let's go to chapter number 2. Before I do that, before I go to chapter number 2, let's just quickly revise this opening, this variation. So we had the opening Bogo Indian, after this c5. This was the main topic. I think that there is also a5 as the move, bishop takes d2 as a move, queen e7 as well. So as a chapter 1 we are going through c5, takes, and now bishop g2, very important detail, not to allow to have some option to play e4. And now d5 is not the best, as we mentioned, because it doesn't allow any flexibility to black pawn structure. After d5 you can just continue developing by knight d2, knight f3, castling, then going e3, and having pretty schematic development, not having to worry about any particular move order. And I feel like there is some improvement on the book in this case. Let me just check it really quickly here. Bishop d7, e3, queen e7, and now after queen e2, rook fd8 to go for rook ac1 to put some pressure on the c file, to use the fact that the pawns on the queen side are doubled, and to have some kind of good exchange Slav, for example. So that's about d5. After bishop g2 castling, now black's idea is usually to get his d6 e5 next, after I play e4, to get d6, knight e2, and after e5, before castling you go a3. Queen b6, and now we get some kind of Marozzi bind structure. Castles. Again, here queen d2 doesn't work because of b3. And c4 becomes quite soft. So first white has to castle. Rook e8, and now takes, queen b4, knight a3. Now we get some very thematic positions appearing in lots of variations. A5, queen d3, and now we just get a typical Marozzi bind position. Queen takes d4, knight c5, and rook cb1. And then we get the knight to c3. We might even get the second knight to e3, and what can you ask for in this position more? It's excellent. So that was a quick revision of this chapter 1, and let's go to this chapter 2. And chapter 2 is this one. Bishop b4, bishop d2, but now now black captures on d2. Now black takes on d2. And here Avrukh chose to give us queen d2. And let's see if we can see the reason why. After long hesitation, I decided to make a choice in favor of recapturing with the queen. Of course, the alternative is taking with the knight, and in this case, I believe black should opt for a typical pawn structure of d6 and e5, although d5 is a possible option. The main point is that with the knight on d2, white would be forced to close the position with d5, as he cannot hold the d4 square. Yeah, that's true. So if the knight is on d2 and the black achieves his d6 and e5 structure, then white has to block with d5, because with this knight on d2 there's not much control over d4. Okay, so he's gonna show us now some line, and it goes something like this: knight c6, knight gf3, d6, e4, e5, d5, and now knight b8, and the knight goes back to, I guess, d7 or a6 and gets to c5. So bishop g2, castles, a5, yeah, now first secure against b4, and after this knight a6, knight d3, queen e7. Finally, with a different move order, the players reached an important theoretical tabia. I assume black would try to play without the move queen e7, perhaps with c6. Now a3, and after bishop g4, f3, bishop d7, b4, takes, and c6. He finishes here and says the position is unclear. Well, it's unclear, but also the knight on a6 is quite bad. But I guess that he's afraid of cd, bishop b5, or some other counterplay. So that's why he chose queen d2, and I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna follow this recommendation. And now it recommends two options for black: castle or to go d5. And we shall check castles first. Let me just delete this one. Okay, so castle now. Bishop g2 and now d6. Again, bishop g2 first before knight f3, because you want to go e4, and that's what white does. And it says here, to my great surprise, this interesting try has only appeared 3 times in practice. In my opinion, it is very logical to benefit from not having our kingside knight on f3 and to advance quickly with e2, e4, followed by knight e2. Yeah, exactly. The point I made. To have e4 quickly. But almost everyone seems to play either knight f3 or knight c3. For some reason. Okay, so now black plays e5. And also we have two sidelines. The one is d5, but after e5 the knight cannot jump to e4, because after this knight c3, it seems that black is losing the pawn on e4. And if b6, you can take on e4, bishop b7 and f3, and you keep the pawn. You castle on the queen side, knight e2, and you keep the pawn. So after d5, e5, a move like knight e8 or knight d7 would be just way too passive. Like you can just capture knight c3 and then go f4, knight f3 and castle and have a nice game. So after this, they also mention c5. But now the issue with this is that white has dc, and now e5. And now white gets some space. If they exchange queens like this, knight g4, f4, white is slightly better. Yeah, then he might go king e2, knight e4 next, and put some pressure on the d file. So yeah, that's quite good. And after c5 takes e5, if black goes knight fd7, there's f4 again, and again white enjoys a pleasant space advantage. Okay, so they don't mention anything else, they just mention e5. And now we don't block with d5. They mention also this here. If d5, then it allows black easy play after c6. This takes, knight a6, knight g2, bishop d7, castling, and b5. And black developed some promising play on the queen side. Yeah, this is not looking promising. So after this, knight e2 was recommended by Avrukh. Knight e2, and now white keeps the structure in the center very flexible. And it says here, if the center is closed by d4, d5, white will be able to push f2, f4 at once. Also, he need not worry about possible bishop g4, which usually puts pressure on white's center if he has developed his kingside knight to f3. Now this move would be nonsensical, as we can simply play f3. This position has never been tested in practice, but I have worked out a few possible lines. Okay, this is from 2010, but I guess that nowadays it has been tested. And now they mention c5 as a move, which doesn't seem like the most logical continuation. They mention knight c6, but after this they don't mention anything else, just white enjoys stable advantage, and as I fail to see how black creates any counterplay. Okay, so they mentioned this, and now white blocks. Knight a6, preparing some b5 next after knight c7. Knight bc3, knight c7, castles, rook b8, a4, b6, And now knight c1. And now he says that it's possible for white to play f4 immediately, but it's also useful to put the knight to d3 to prepare f4 much better. a6, knight to d3, and now b5. Now b5 and here b3. He's trying to close the queen side to be able to break in the center and on the king side. Okay, so here it mentions that this looks quite attractive, cb, and after ab to go b4. But actually it doesn't work, because after c4, knight b2, taking and capturing with the knight, there's this move. And now if knight captures, then there's this. If queen captures, then knight b5 comes with tempo, and black gets some counterplay after knight d4. This knight is a monster there, and it's too much counterplay for the pawn. So actually they like more this move. They welcome the blocking of the queen side by b4. So now black plays knight d7. And here it's time for cb, ab, and then b4. But wait, what's the difference now? Knight b2? Like c4, knight b2? What happens if you take? Oh, here it stopped. Like it says white has a positional advantage, but what is actually the difference between the two lines? What changed? Maybe d6 is undefended in this case, and that's making some difference, but I don't see it. If you take on a4 and you do the same, knight c, a4, c3, here knight b5, maybe there is this move. But again, you can do knight f6 and go knight d4 anyways. Maybe there's this, and but still, bishop d7 happens, and after this, knight d4. Oh, no, not like this. But something has to happen here. So we have this as slightly better position. Let's check quickly with the engine. Let's check it. So we have this, rook a4. It recommends rook a4. But also there is this knight c4. So why wouldn't you just do it move earlier? Like, wait, here take and go b4, c4, here takes rook a4. What's so bad about this? Rook a4, oh, bishop d7, yeah. Oh, I didn't see it. And after this, there was that. Yeah, so it's this way, knight b5, queen d2, and knight d4. Yeah, very interesting. And now if This happens, now there's no bishop d7 and you can capture with the rook. Quite clever. Okay, let's go back. This was the whole thing with this bishop d2 takes and castling immediately. Now let's see what happens if d5 is played right away. If d5, then knight f3, castles, bishop g2, and this is now a crossroad. Black has queen e7 as a move, he has knight bd7, and also b6. Let's check out b6 first, because it's... And also dc4 is a move as well. But let's go with b6 first. It says here, this leads to a typical Queen's Indian type of position, but the absence of dark square bishop gives white a pleasant advantage. White now has a few promising avenues, but I like the following example the best. So he captures on d5 here. ed, castles, bishop b7, knight c3, knight bd7, rook ac1, rook e8, rook fd1, and now a6. To stop some knight b5, probably. Just avoiding such stuff. And here it mentions after c5, it's really bad because after knight h4, now you cannot play knight e4 because after capturing knight f5 is very strong. I guess because of knight d6 or dc5 next. So after this, black has to block the center because white is going to capture on c5 and capture on d5 next. So he plays this. But after b3, he breaks the pawn chain and the d5 pawn becomes a huge weakness. There's also an option of knight f5 next, knight e3 or knight d6 to jump around with the knight. So yeah, this is looking really good. And I was here after rook fd1, a6 was played. We looked at c5, so after this, queen c2, knight f8, b4 to fix the pawns, queen e7, and now just go queen b3, knight e6, and after e3, it says here that white enjoys a small but stable positional advantage in Belyavsky-Kasimdzhanov. Okay, this looks good. You can really do some damage here by putting pressure on the c-file, maybe going at some point bishop h3 as well to liquidate this defender of c7. So yeah, once black makes c6 as a move, then you might go knight e5 next, and there is indeed some potential to press. Okay, so let's go back. Let's go back again. We have this takes d5, knight f3, castles, and now bishop g2. So now we are going to look at dc4. What happens if black is greedy? Well, now we can do knight a3. And then take on c4 on the next move. What can black do? He can go for c5 maybe. But c5 is clearly worse according to Avrukh because of capture. And after knight e4, to take, knight c4, knight c6, castles, knight c5. And now after rook fd1, white has an advantage because the bishop on c8 is still undeveloped, and knight d6 is gonna come next, followed by rook ac1, and yeah, this seems quite bad for black. Not losing, nothing like that, but it looks really unpleasant. After this, knight d6 and rook ac1, it can turn out quite ugly. But at least black doesn't have to deal with the bishop pair. White doesn't have the bishop pair, so it's tiny bit easier. Okay, where was I? So we had this and we checked out c5. But here actually it's better to go bishop d7 to somehow neutralize this bishop on g2. And now when I take on c4, bishop c6, castling. Now of course white still has this space advantage, but at least the bishop is not so bad. Knight bd7, rook fc1, bishop d5, and now b4, trying to stop any c5 move which could potentially make it easier for black. After this, queen e7, and also by b4 you're just gaining more space on the queen side as well. Queen b2, rook ac8, knight a5 now. Now you want to poke a bit to provoke some move like b6 or... But black's not gonna do it. That's not happening. Knight a5, knight b8, knight e5, and now after exchanging of bishops, white was much better in Portish Nikolic. And yes, he is much better because now black has to play something like c6. He doesn't want to play b6 because it just weakens the c6. But even then you might just go with a4 and b5 at least, or just put pressure like rook c2, rook c1, and then play for b5. You have lots of ideas. White is pretty much cramping black, and it's not easy for black to find any active plan. Maybe to try to exchange some pieces, but white's not obliged to exchange. He might even go to d3 and c5 with the other knight. Okay, with this one to c4 and then to get to c5 like this. Or in case of some exchange offer like let's say e3, knight d7, to go just knight c4 and to anticipate this with capturing with the pawn and then getting the knight to d6. That's also a potential possibility. So what can we do here? We were here, castles, and now there's also left queen e7 and knight bd7. This move and knight bd7. So we're gonna begin with queen e7. What's happening there? We castle, and now black has 3 branching points. Oh my god. Isn't that lovely? Black has dc4, he has b6 and also rook d8. And we shall begin with dc4. Also to mention that variations with knight bd7 are going to transpose at some point, so we're not gonna look at them right now, we're gonna look them later. So dc4, now we have this knight a3 stopping b5, and we're gonna capture on c4. Rook d8 by black, preparing c5 maybe, I would say. But what happens if black tries c5 immediately? Well, then we capture and then rook ac1. Of course, there's no point in b5 because you can do something like knight d4 and then capture on b5, and then the whole queen side collapses. So actually black is losing this pawn. Knight c6 and then knight c4, rook d8, and now queen g5. That's very interesting, offering the trade. Also it says that here queen f4 is quite interesting as a move, but let's see what happens in this. Black takes, and now, oh no, knight d4. And now, oh wow, rook fd1. Aha, now because of some back rank issues, black cannot capture on e2 because of king f1, and after going back, there's knight e5, and then f7 becomes takeable. Okay, so what's the best? After this, to go h6. And now e3, wow. So we have IQP. hg, rook d4, takes, knight e8, to stop knight e6, yep. And now rook c3. It's clear that white has a strong initiative. So what was the point of rook c3? I don't quite get it. Maybe to get rook b3 next and to put pressure on b7. Yeah, this is looking quite good for white, because the bishop on c8 is still paralyzed. It cannot go anywhere because of b7, and you might want to stop. I mean, the only way for black to untangle from this is to go rook b8 and then b6, bishop b7, but that takes lots of time. And even then, you might even go, let's say, if rook b8, let's just put the sign here. If he goes here, knight a5 could be dangerous with rook c7 if knight d6. And also what happens, knight a5, if b6, you can do this check, not check, but something. And now you can take on a7, yeah? You can take it, and if he takes, we have bishop c6 in the end, and it's all over. So after this, bishop d7, oh, yeah, I forgot. So I forgot. So b6 here is not possible at all, because you lose the piece after rook b7 and capturing on a7 after this. So this can be quite dangerous after this. Now I wonder how to continue here, because black is just going to play king f8, king e8, king d8. Let's say if I go here, how do I proceed after this? I cannot do much here. Maybe I can do d5, but still you go king e8 and ignore me completely. The f7 is under protection, so it's not gonna be easy. So this, knight a5, or maybe some other move. Maybe knight e5. Maybe this one. But then I wonder if f6 does anything bad to black. You cannot go here because of king f7 and it's just pointless. If you go back, it's questionable if you did anything to damage his pawn structure, because e6 is still defended pretty nicely. And can you actually attack the e6 pawn? I go king f7, and what do? I go here, king e7. Maybe I could do something like bishop c6 here. I don't know, bishop c6, and if you allow me, I'll capture on e8 and go rook c7, which seems like a good, like a decent progress. If you do this, well, b6 can be a problem, yeah. b6, because if I capture, he can capture on a5 and then take on b2, which... Okay, he cannot capture because of this, so... Maybe that's the point, to just have the a5 as a weakness, but also I have d4, so I'm not sure. Rook c3, rook b8. How to break through here? Maybe I should leave this for the second part where I check with the engine, and maybe we could figure things out. But yeah, this looks very good for me. Looks very good for white. I just have to know how to continue after this. It's not just enough to say, aha, I have a better position. I just have to know how to keep playing this. Because structurally I'm doing much worse, and I have to play energetically in order to maintain this advantage. So if black stabilizes this, I'm in huge trouble, because the d4 pawn is a weak one, and I cannot afford exchanging rooks, for example, or doing something like that. But let's not get there just yet. After this, we looked at c5, but what happens on rook d8? Knight c4, c5, and now this move. And wait, if you take on d4 now, you can take back, right? Because e5 doesn't work since there is knight f5 and the rook on d8 is loose. Okay, so after this they mention knight a6, And why not this? It says here queen e3, knight d5 and queen b3 would keep the serious pressure. Okay. So after knight a6, knight c e5, bishop d7, takes, queen a5, rook a d8, and with e3, it says here white has a pleasant edge, and it evaluates it like slightly better. Okay, that's a typical position for Catalan, like typical small edge, some pressure on the b7, and we can do that. Okay, let's go back. So we had... Let's go back just to repeat something. This, bishop b4, bishop d2, takes, d5, knight f3, castles, bishop g2, queen e7, and now after castling, now we will see b6. And now we capture, like in the previous line, which we saw in the beginning of this chapter. cd, ed, knight c3, bishop b7, and now knight h4, using the absence of the bishop. That's nice. To get to f5. And now queen e6 by black. And it says here this seems to be the black's best option, but let's see why other moves are weaker. Okay, let's see why rook d8 is weaker. Because of this. And now, what do we do? If you go queen e6, isn't there something like this? Provoking g6, and it looks really bad. Even by going back to e3, you just achieved a lot. And you don't need some finishing blow, but you can also go bishop h3 here, followed by some discovered check on h6, attacking the queen as well. So I think this is quite crushing. And if he chooses the more passive queen f8, queen f4, knight a6 to defend the pawn, rook ac1. Aha, here he mentions after queen e6, queen g5, g6, and then e4. Black is in serious trouble. Oh, that's a good one, but I don't understand why. What happens on this? Do you just capture? Oh, you capture, right? You capture, and if bishop takes, bishop takes. Because after this there is queen takes rook. And if this happens, then queen takes knight, and then you have two threats. Checkmate on g7 or capturing the rook on d8. Okay. But what's wrong with this move? I don't see it. Maybe just king h8 and he's just fine. But is he though? Is he good? Knight h6, queen e7, and then maybe queen e5. Queen e5, but no, he keeps it together like with rook e8, I guess. Yeah, rook e8 should keep it together. So this e4, and if I take twice, bishop e4 and on c6, what happens then? Maybe you go rook e1 and then some discoveries happen. Bishop c6, followed by knight e7. Yeah, this is quite dangerous. This is quite dangerous. So that's why rook d8 is not so good after knight h4. And let's see knight e4. Knight e4 is also bad, even worse, because after this knight f5, there's queen d8 and then d5. Oh, because of this fork on e7. That's nice. And this means that black's losing the e4 pawn. But wait, if I go rook e8, what happens? Wait, let's give exclamation mark and then rook e8, maybe queen d4, right? Queen d4 and then attack g7 and d4 at the same time. And if you have to do this, then it's a bit sad. Queen f6, then take, and just go rook fd8, rook fd1, and then have your fun. Like, even with d6, it's possible. Maybe here d6 and you could crush. Okay, so all of these moves are quite bad. So that's why we are on this one, queen e6. And now he proposes this move to probably attack the c7 pawn and then to support the f5 jump. Knight a6 and now rook fd1. White has many moves that will improve his position, such as rook ac1, a3, b4, and black also must watch out for a knight f5 jump. That's right. And he finishes here and he says that white's chances are preferable. Okay. I can live with that. That's a good assessment. I mean, always when you play something like c5 as black, I will have some target on d5. So that's good. Okay, now we have the third option. Let's go back a bit. d4 knight f6, e4 e6, g3 bishop b4, takes, d5 knight f3, castles, bishop g2, queen e7, and now after this we have rook d8 as the final option. Rook d8 and now rook c1. It says here that more played is queen c2, but in my opinion our queen is not so badly placed on d2 and it might be transferred to e3 or f4. That's interesting. So we're keeping this option to ourselves to get to e4, to e3 or f4. Okay, and now black plays c6. Quite solid, but let's see what happens on knight c6. On that, we can do this. Bishop d7 and now queen e3. Bishop e8 and now knight d2. White is slightly better, and that's it. I mean, yeah, it's always like this. White has slight pressure, slightly more space, and that's enough. So after rook c1, c6, and now queen e3. This is a good square for white's queen, where it controls the important central squares of e4 and d5 and vacates the d2 square for the development of this knight. Yeah, that's good. And now bishop d7 by black. And here it says that capturing on c4 is not really good, because after this, knight d7, queen a3, you exchange queens, and after king f8, rook c1. But why rook c1? I don't know. Rook c1 takes knight d4, knight c4, f6, knight e1, knight g5, and now you put some pressure on the queen side. You get some space, knight b6, a5, knight d5, and then with this move we are better, because there's no c5 break. b6 is impossible to play so far, and that makes black very passive, and that makes white's position enjoyable. Okay, so after this, bishop d7 is the better choice, and now knight b d2, bishop e8, and now this. We want to get to a5 actually, to put pressure on b7. That's nice. Also, it's possible to go for a3 and to try to expand by b4, but if black goes with a5, then to stop this expansion after c5 and a4, after this, white also has some slight edge. But we chose this one, he chose this one. Knight b d7. For example, if he goes knight a6, they say a3, rook a c8, and now c5. Once black is ready to push c5, we push c5 ourselves, and then the rook c8 seems futile. Seems like a loss of time. And then it says here we have a chance of offensive on the queen side with knight a5, b4, a4, and so on and so on. And it's not gonna be so easy for black to create counterplay in the center or on the king side. So I like it. And also after knight b3, what happens if a5? That's also answered by knight c5, knight a6, and going back to d3. And I guess again, if you go here, we have c5. We have c5, and then we also have a potential of going for a3, b4, and to make some progress on the queen side. Okay, now let's check out after knight b3, what happens on knight b d7. We go here as planned, and now after this, rook a b1, preparing b4 and trying to cause some weakness on the queen side by pushing b5, b4, b4, b5. And let's see, if knight f8, Then c5, knight g6, b4, and we get what we want. We want to push on the queen side. If something that's not mentioned in the book. What happens if queen b4 actually? It seems like I have to exchange queens some way, but because if I go back to b3 there is dc4, and what have I done? After this there's b5 and black's better. So maybe after queen b4 we can do queen c3 or even queen a3. Because in case of this b7 becomes vulnerable and you cannot defend it actually. If you move the b pawn there's knight c6. If you go here there's c5 and then you capture on b7. So this seems like a good plan. Queen a3, and how does black play here? If he goes back to b6, and now I continue with c5 I guess. Or yeah, just c5 and after this b4. This seems good. So after rook ab1, rook dc8 is mentioned and as the main line, and now cd5. Now ed is impossible because the queen is pinned. If you take with the pawn, then you take on c8, take, and take on b7, and now black doesn't have too much compensation after queen b4. You can just go queen b3, and once you exchange, even though they're double pawns, it's extra pawn. All in all, it's an extra pawn. So that's fine. That's fine. So after cd, knight takes seems like the better choice, like more solid. But after this and c5, which is actually a bad move because after e4, knight b6, now we get some space in the center by e5. And white got the initiative in this position. He got the space by e5, also opened up the bishop on g2, which was temporarily closed by e4, but now with e5 again the bishop is pretty much active and hitting on b7, so the c5 actually doesn't work that well. And after queen d2 they mentioned that this move is good, but even after that, after b4, f6, e4, e5, now just a3, and after bishop f7, queen e3, still white is slightly better. Because he's putting some pressure on the queen side by not allowing c5. The rook on b8 is stuck defending b7, so I feel like this should be okay. This should be good for white. Okay, so now where were we? Aha, now we're at this crossroad. So if we do this, g3, bishop b4, takes, d5, knight f3, bishop g2, and now we don't play queen e7. Black plays Knight bd7. We castle. Oh, and now black has three options again. dc4, queen e7, and c6. And let's begin with dc4. And now probably he will go for b5 next, so we go for a4. And there's a nice line here. After knight a3, it shows why this can be a bit problematic. So after this, e5 is very good, and now after this there's knight e5, using the fact that the king is on g1 and it can get checked. After this, knight f3 takes rook d8 and black is supposedly fine. Bishop e6 comes next and it's fine for black. So exclamation mark. And after this, if queen c3 happens, then you take bishop f3, queen e7. And on this, go c6 and black blocked the bishop on f3. He might try to play b4, b5, but black should be doing fine. Also, there is idea like bishop e6, bishop d5 to exchange the bishops. So yeah, this is not so good for white. And that's why after this, there's a4 to keep the knight on b1 defending the queen, because now if you go e5, there's no knight e5 because I can capture and recapture with the knight. So after this, black plays c5. They mention also b6, but after this, knight d5, knight c4, bishop a6, knight ba3, c5, and now e4. Knight b4, and then e5, knight d5, and now this. Oof, this is terrible. This is awful. If black goes queen e7, then this, and if e5, then we can take. And what's wrong with this? Well, yeah, if you play this, there's knight f5, knight e6, and it's quite bad. So that's why black tries to block with e4, and we go here, knight b6, knight e3, and now bishop e6. And what happens on c5? We take, and go a5. Take a b6, a6, and then rook a5 with some pressure. But the bishop is a bit stupid. I might have to find something else. Like, I'm not so convinced about this one. But okay, let's see what happens on a5. On a5, queen c2, c6, and then this one. Oh, queen c5, and what happens if I go here? Can I just play d5 and no? Maybe in that case f3 and open up the f file. That seems like a good plan. Like this, and take with the rook and continue. If you do this, I might have queen f8 and some crazy line like this. Knight g3. Takes king f7. Although I think black is okay here, actually. Unless I have some quick d5, but it doesn't feel right. Also, I might have g4 here, I don't know. This seems crazy, but it might work. But I'll keep that for the second phase of opening work. First, I'm going to do the book work, and then I'm gonna check everything that's in the book. It's gonna take a while, but that's how it's gonna be. So I was here, queen c5, and black took. Black took on c5, and now dc5. Knight d7 takes, bishop takes because e4 hangs, and then knight c4. Oh, I like this. I like this. a5 is weak. I have the d file, so I can't complain. Okay, so now knight e3, bishop e6 was the move. And now a5 this, a6 b6, knight c6, queen d6, rook fc1, knight e3, queen e3, and now bishop d5 to hit the knight, and now queen a3. That's nice. And now the point is, if you capture like this or capture on c6, I can take and go rook c6, and I have the c file to myself. I can also go bishop h3 if I want to stop rook c8, so it's all good. Okay, let's see something else. We were here, castles. dc4, a4, c5 is the main move, and now rook d1. Rook d1. Aha, now it mentions that after knight a3, for example, there's b6 and black can develop properly, because this won't work, since you can capture and take on d4 and have nice compensation for the exchange. So we go rook d1 first, and then this one. Now if b6, there is knight e5, knight d5, and then e4, knight f6, and now knight c4. Bishop a6, this one takes, and yeah, we have some pressure here as white. Okay, so we go back. Knight a3, cd4, queen d4. Not with the knight, because then we have this, and now you cannot capture with the knight because of e5 and knight b3 fork. And if you try this, then e5 and the bishop comes out, and it's okay for black. So we take with the queen, and now e5. And now queen c3. You don't want to capture the queen, because on queen c4 it runs into knight b6. Knight b6, and then bishop comes out, and there's no problem for black. So you want to recapture with the knight on c4. Now the knight cannot go to b6 because of at least queen e5 or knight e5. Even this looks good, like a5 and then on this to capture on e5, but I'm not so sure. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. I could check it, but in the second phase. e4, knight d4, knight c5. I don't like this that much for white. Knight e5, in that case you can take on c4, take, and it says white's slightly better. Okay. Knight c5, take on c4, bishop d7, and now queen b4. And now they mention one line which goes something like this: if knight d5, there's this. And if you take with the bishop, then we have a double attack on the bishop and the knight. So black has to capture, because if you go queen e6, then I can take on d5 and fork like this. So actually the only move is to take on b4, and after this to go knight d6. And white has a huge advantage, because also there is e4 which hangs. b7 also quite shaky. So yeah, that's nice. Unless I lose to do this move, but at least I can take on b7, I suppose. No, but the rook hangs. Wait, maybe this one. Maybe this one, and then what? Knight c6 maybe. What can I do here? Or just rook c1. Why not? Why not just that? And if bishop c2, then knight d5 or what? Or just go back to f5 and then to e3. No. I'd have to check out this. But wait, what's wrong with this move? I forgot. 96. knight c6, and no, but I can capture like this, and after that to take on c6. Wait. And after that, maybe to go with this rook, so I can capture on a7 in this case. Or yeah, just capture like this, and if they capture, then I take on b7 or take on e4. If this goes, then I go back to a1 or a3, let's say. And in this case of f5, then I take. And because of back rank issues, I can take this pawn. Okay, so let's go back again. This position, and we have queen e7, which transposes to knight bd7, which I mentioned, I guess, before. And now queen c2. The different plan. But here, if you go rook c1 as white, there is one problem with this, because they mention after c6, and if you try queen f4 or queen e3, there's b6 followed by bishop a6 or bishop b7, and they finally get the c5 carried out, and it's not so good for white, not so promising, at least. So they chose queen c2, and now c6 by black. It says here the best alternative is to go c5, the best way to oppose white, is to go here, and after cd, knight d5, knight c3, takes, take on d4, because pressure, and if this, knight f6, and now rook ac1. Now you get some nice pressure after this, knight b3, e4, and then queen c7. If black exchanges queens, then that's not so good. So yeah, this is good. And if c6, knight bd2. We want to go for e4 next. And now black has to choose, does he want to allow e4 or does he want to play e5 himself? And the main move here is to play e5, to not allow e4 that easily. So the second choice is to go b6 here. And now he allows e4. We take and go bishop b7, rook fe1, and then black takes. And here he says something like this: if black manages to carry out the programmed c4, c6, c5 advance and then exchanges on d4 and forces white to capture on c5, then in most cases black is alright. But if white succeeds in blocking the c6 pawn by playing c4, c5, or can meet the c6, c5 advance by d4, d5, then white can fight for the advantage. In this position we have the second case, and white has chances of an advantage. Okay, let's see. Knight f6, queen c2 back. And now if black plays c5, like he mentioned, there's d5 to fight it. And if black tries this, then we play c5 ourselves. Okay, so, and you look at this bishop on b7, which is quite bad, and we have a clear advantage. So b6, because of these reasons, is not so good. Black goes with e5, and now we do this. We take on d5, and I want to ask what's wrong with e4. Aha, it mentions here. Ah, we have a d6, and if he takes, we take on e4. And if queen e6, then knight g5. And we're winning the pawn, because after this we have e3 first. Defend the d4 pawn, and then capture on e4. That's nice. Nice. And after this, what happens if cd? Aha, then we can just play this, take, and go knight f3 and play against IQP on d5, and it's very pleasant. Or we can go for e4, which seems a bit too much. After d4, in case of ed4, there is ed5, knight d5, rook fe1, queen c5, takes, knight d4, and the bishop is laser beaming the b7 and the knight on d5. So yeah, this is a bad one. And if he takes like this, knight e4, here rook fe1, again we have the open position with symmetrical structure, but the bishop will be very unpleasant. Boom. So that's why it's best to go with knight captures to somehow keep the bishop closed. And now e4. Now the e4 move, and black has two other options besides knight b6. He has knight b4, and then we can go queen c3, takes, and then go c5, which is a mistake, because in that case we have this and knight c4, and everything just comes with the tempo. So instead of this, he can go with knight b6, but white still has some edge. After knight a6, rook c1, it's still very good. And here, if he goes to f6 from d5, there's rook fe1, rook d8. Here, in case of capturing on d4 with the idea of getting queen c5, you can take and go knight c4 with very pleasant ending. Okay, so after this, rook a1, you just put rooks on the normal squares. Take, knight b6, go to b3 and then to a5 or c5 as well. Bishop g4, f3, bishop e6, and now queen c5. Queen e8 and then e5. this and go back to c1. Oh, this is looking quite bad. f4 and then f5. This looks very good for white. Knight c5 comes next, and there's lots of pressure. Okay, so we chose... The author chose to go to b6 as black. And now rook ac1. So he wants to stop ed4, knight d4, queen c5. And also the point of knight b6 was to stop knight c4 after these exchanges. Like in this case of knight f6, let's say this. Now this knight c4 is quite unpleasant, jumping to d6 and causing plenty of trouble. So that's why this was played, but now rook ac1, nice prophylaxis against queen c5. And now rook d8 was played, knight b3, takes, and now knight e5. If you go knight f8, then just rook fe1 and you can push the pawn by f4, e5. So here, f4, knight c4, queen e2. To attack the knight, okay. Knight a5. Quite clever. Defend it, and then take with the knight. And it says here that white has slight edge. Because his queenside pawns are, black's queenside pawns are quite limited, like really boxed. c5 is not possible to play, and white might just play in the center by e5, f5, and maybe spread to the king side. So what's left here after? Let's repeat. After this, knight bd7, castling. We're gonna take a look at c6. And now knight e5 for white. And it's mainly played against b6 and bishop b7 ideas, which would help black to push c5 at some point. So black takes. But is there something else? Is there a better way to go? Maybe if you go queen c7, there's just f4 and no point in that. Okay, they capture f4 and now knight b6. Knight a3 by white. Okay, and now dc4. And here they mention queen e7, rook ac1, rook d8, here bishop d7, and now c5. Now when the knight has to go to c8, where it's more passive than on d7 and could potentially break with f6, I guess. On c8 it's just too passive. So after this e4 is good, and after b6 just do this. Oh, this is nice. And after this c6. Oh, no. After this ed5. Oh. e d5, bishop c6. Because if you take on d5, there is queen d5 and rook b8 and c6. So you have to do this and then just cb6. If you take, then rook c6, knight d5 and queen c1, and black is clearly better. What else? If bishop d5, then rook c7, oh, queen e8, b7, rook b8, take, bishop d5, and then queen e2, and then you win the... No, you don't. Oh, it's queen g2. I can't read. Queen g2, queen d7, and now queen h3. Wow. Now we want to go bishop f3, because at this moment you cannot do that, because he just captures and this is a draw. But now you force him to capture like this, and black has this weakness on d5. It's a passed pawn, but it's also a weakness. So this is very good for white, just entering with the king and having a pleasant endgame. Okay, and after knight b5, if you don't capture, then you just suffer. If you take on c5, then this, knight a6, and when you put the knight to c5, it's just game over. I mean, if you go rook b5 to stop it, I have a4, and anyways I get to c5. So what else? If bishop e8, then take on d5, and if cd5, then c6, and the c pawn is crushing black. So that's why ed, and now we take, and now knight d4. And what happens if c5? We go here, right? We go here, and if queen e6, then we go to e3, or to d6 maybe, I don't know. It's a bit confusing. Wait. What's gonna happen? Wait, this c5, is there something clever? I guess not. Knight f5, queen e6, and I'd like to say knight to d6, but you can avoid this by knight e7. I don't see a good way to continue here. Okay, I'm gonna check it out in the phase 2, like I said. I'm gonna check all these doubts in the phase 2. And after this, knight a7 was mentioned in the book. And then rook e1. Followed by f5, and some crushing attack on the king side, which is very possible. Okay, let's go back here. So we had bishop d7. Sorry, no, queen e7. Queen e7 as an option. And what happens on this move? We can take, and can we do this simply and crush black? I think we can, because the bishop is dead on c8. I can check it out later. So the main move is dc4. And now just this. Takes, bishop d7. And now knight c4. So what happens if just play rook ad1? Rook fd8 and then e4. King f8, bishop f1, king e7, bishop c4. Ah, then bishop e8 and you exchange rooks. That's bad. Also, rook c1 was mentioned, but it also doesn't bring too much, because after this, take this, and now king helps. King f8, king f2, king e7, rook b4, rook ab8, rook d6, but bishop e8 is quite strong. And now after this, there's f6 to undermine the pawn chain. Okay, so that's why knight c4 is recommended. And now if you take rook ab8, rook ad1, interesting, with some pleasant edge. But wait, what's up with this? Do you just take, like, do you take the pawn back with rook b1, or do you want to trap it by rook d4? I guess not, because he has c5 and then it becomes a bit complex. I guess you go rook b1 and then take on b7, and c6 becomes a weakness. So yeah, this is looking quite nice. You can push the knight away with b3 later on, but you might also have to advance on the king side by h4, h5, and slowly put pressure on the king side. And as a conclusion, it says here, black's exchange on d2 is not very popular these days, but despite being quite a reliable option, still it seems that white retains the better chances anywhere with the help of some improvements. Okay. That's it. I finished 2 chapters today, and I'll see, what is this, like 3 hours, almost 3 hours of work. I might also try to continue with the chapter 3. Yeah, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna continue with the chapter 3, and that's how I'm gonna finish the first day. So the third chapter is going to be also bishop b4, bishop d2, but a5 as an option for black. And again we go bishop g2. d6 is there for black, there is castling for black, and also there is d5. So let's begin with d6 here. Now it says here it's quite popular setup for black. He wants to go knight d7, push e5, and then force blocking the position by d5. Now we get our e4. Knight bd7, knight e2, and now castles, and now e5. And we can go with knight bc3. And now it says here, now the following line is not forced, but it does show the typical play. Now when black captures, to take like this, knight e5, b3, bishop c5, and knight f5. It seems that black is slightly worse after capturing, taking, and a c6, queen c2, and now it says here white's chances are preferable as he has a clear plan of improving his position. First rook a d1 and then king h1. For example, rook a d1, h3, king h1, and then start pushing these pawns on the king side. He can't afford to exchange pieces because in that case the structure will show. 4 against 3 on this side is going to allow black with some exchanges to have a better position. So here white has to play energetically and to somehow organize attack on the king. Okay, the second option is to castle after bishop g2. To castle, and now e4 again. Wonder. Now we get the knight to e2 and we castle. And also we avoid the b6 positions because in that case e5 happens. So that's nice. And what happens if black does the same? d6. Well, we do this, e5, and then a3. Then bishop d2, which is forced, knight d2. Here he doesn't like queen d2 because of a4. And after this, knight c6. There's also a possibility of knight a5 to target the c4, so it's a bit annoying. So that's why knight d2 is played. And now with the queen on d1, a4 becomes less appealing to black. After a4 there is castle, knight c6, here it says after rook e8 there is also queen c2 and rook a c1, f4 next, and so on. Knight c6, d5, knight b8. And now after this, bishop d7, then we switch to f4. With some play on the king side, which seems to me really good. Okay, so after this, the best is to capture on d4. And in that case we take knight c6, not like this. Knight c6, knight b5, knight e5, and then we castle c6, knight c3, and white is better, logically. But we here have this challenge of d5. What happens on d5? Well, here they mentioned e5 as a move. And I believe that this won't work. But because of what? Ah, because of this. Takes, f3, knight g5, and then h4. Okay, so it has to go to d7. Then we take, knight c3, knight b6 to defend the pawn. For example, if c5 here, then a3 takes, bishop takes, knight c6, and then f4 with some strong center and initiative. Okay, that's cool. Knight g2, c6, and now castle. With a very complex position, but my opinion is that white has every chance to fight for advantage. Okay, we have an optimist. Avrukh is optimist about this position. I'm also optimist. I have a strong center, so why would I not be the optimist? So what do we have next? We have, in this position, we have d5 as the final option. Knight f3 and then castle. Castle. And here he says dc4 leads to a Catalan position, which is mentioned in the volume 1, which I will cover later. So we're not gonna see dc4. In this case, we're gonna see c6, knight c6, and b6. And let's begin with b6. And this might be some rule of thumb if black plays b6 to play immediately to capture on d5. After this, knight e5, bishop b7, bishop g5. This takes, knight c3. Okay, now if you take on c3, I take and go c4 next, which I find bad for black. Rook d8, in that case rook c1, knight a6, and then e3, queen e6, knight d3, bishop d6, and queen b3. With the pressure on d5, you can't play c6 as black, and white is just better in this case. Okay, let's put this on the top. Let's check out the c6 move. Queen c2 and now b6. b6. Also, they mention here knight bd7. And now bishop f4. And there's a nasty idea here. To go c5 and then to trap the bishop by a3. So after bishop e7, rook d1. Oh, we reached the position from the volume 1. Okay. We reached the Catalan position, which is in the first book. So that's not gonna happen. After this, b6, bishop g5, bishop e7. Now knight bd2, bishop b7, and here if bishop a6 is played, there's this move, knight fd7, takes, and now this. So he doesn't allow the exchange of knights, which is essential for the side which has more space. And now knight f6, rook ac1, rook d8, rook fe1, knight bd7, and now e4. And now black doesn't capture at all. He goes for this, but now after this, knight e8, knight f4, black is slightly worse here. I might also expand by pushing h4 on the king side, so it's a good position. But they play bishop b7 here as the main move. And now I go e4. h6. Here if d4, we take bishop e7, queen e7, queen e4, and now we can meet c5 by d5. But can you actually? If queen f6, what happens? You might go queen e5 or knight e5 as well to stop knight e7. Okay, so we go h6, bishop e3, and then knight a6, rook fd1. Oh. And this is where it finishes. It just says that it's a good position for white, it's a good version of Catalan, and white is slightly better. Okay. The final line is after castling, knight c6. But again, we have queen c2. Queen c2, and now b6 doesn't work because the knight hangs on c6. dc4 is there. There is rook a6. And also there is bishop e7. Let's go with the bishop e7 first. Bishop e7, rook d1, knight b4. Okay, he wants to harass my queen, so what? Queen c1, and now he takes. Aha, now the point is if I take with the queen, there is b6, followed by bishop a6. So I do not capture immediately, I go a3, and on this queen c4, and now on b6 to go back to c2 with e4 next. Okay, that's bishop e7. What happens on rook a6? a3, bishop e7, rook d1, and the rook is misplaced on a6. Yep. So the only move left is dc4. Queen c4 and now queen d5. Also there is bishop d6 to prepare e5. But then after knight c3, e5, d5, knight e7, rook ac1, now white has a nice outpost for the knight to b5, and c7 is going to become a target in the future. So that's not very smart. So that's why queen d5 is played, but then you can just capture on d5. If knight captures, then knight c3, bishop d7, rook ac1, and if black captures, then bishop takes. This one, a3, bishop d6, knight d2, and now the bishop strikes on the long diagonal and white has a pleasant edge. But if e captures d5, then bishop f4, bishop g4, and now I have to defend the d4 pawn first. So first I go a3, and now bishop d6 is not really good, because after this you can go for knight c3, and in case of capturing twice, I go back and d5 is more or less dead. This one, rook ad1, d4, and then knight b5. This, take it, rook c2, rook b1, and then take on d6, and a5 is making black's position quite bad. b7 is also a target, so white is excellent. And after this, bishop e7 seems like the better choice. Rook d1, and now rook fc8. Knight c3, and now knight d8. He wants to go c6 and to defend the pawn on d5. But now we go knight e5, bishop e6, and now bishop g5 to somehow eliminate this knight. And now we force black to go c6, but then we have knight a4, and now we see the setback of a5. Rook a6, rook ac1, and here he says white's pieces are much better coordinated, and white is slightly better. And that was the chapter 3. It was the shortest one so far. And tomorrow I'm going to continue with this opening preparation. And till I finish my repertoire for white, I'm not gonna stop. That was it, and see you tomorrow. Bye.